Okay guys, hey, this is Matt Slay. Listen, I want to show you some things I've discovered in the Visual Studio Form Designer that I think are going to require some special workarounds because of the way Visual Studio Designer handles controls dropped on a form from your custom control classes. Here's a case where I have built a user control. It's a .NET standard, .NET UI class. Inside of the user control, I've added a label, a text box, and a button. Okay, and that's in a particular library that I created designing this little reusable container that I would expect to use on multiple forms in my app. Okay, so down here I've already created just a blank form in sort of my UI, my actual app, piece. And watch, I'm going to drag this user control on the form and put it there. Okay, so it brought in all that stuff, all with it. I'm going to hit save, which I think fires the form designer generator. So if you go look at the code here, it has put right here one instance of the user control on the form, and then there's some code right down here. This is in the designer PRG file. Now this actually creates an instance of that user control, as you can see right here, and just X sharp stuff, right? But here's where the tricky part starts to happen here. Inside of this designer of this form, Visual Studio has begun to add specific code references to various properties on each individual control within this container. Okay, this is a container class imported on this form, but you see that it has gone in here and said, hey, the user control .button .caption equals this, and these are the initial values of that caption that came from the base user control. Okay, and the position that it uses is from the original position of that label, text box, and button within the container over in where it was designed. So it all seems kind of okay here, but the problem is what I want to show you is I'm going to close down the form, and that class instance is still dropped on the form. But watch, I'm going to go back into the user control itself. And I'm going to go here, and let's say I wanted to move this button down here, and perhaps I wanted to make the button bigger, and let's say I wanted to change the button, the caption of that button. So if I come over here and say, where's caption at? Is it up under here? Let's see if I can't do it just under text. New caption. Okay, so I've made some changes in my base user control here, and in our FoxPro space, these changes would propagate forward everywhere that this user control is used throughout the app. Okay, but watch, if I go open this form class up again, this form 3, look what's happened. None of those settings have made their way from that user control up into this form. In this instance of the user control, because when we drag this control onto the form space earlier, Visual Studio created all these essentially hard-coded references to all the things like the caption and the position and the size and all that kind of mess. So none of the changes that I made in that base class are now propagating up here into this instance of the user control. There's just no way to do it. Now, interesting, watch this. I'm going to make my form a little bigger. I'm going to drag a new copy of this thing out. Ah, that's interesting. I think maybe it's because I didn't rebuild. I'm going to delete this second instance. Let me go back to my app-based classes and rebuild that thing. Okay, now let's see if I drag one here and put it. Yeah, see now what's happened because I rebuilt, my app class over here, DLL. Now look, the second instance that I dropped on this form, it has brought in, the current settings, but it's just temporary, so to speak, right? Because if I do save and I go look at this view code again, well, all he's done now is he's put a second instance and he's putting these, property settings here, but guess what? These are just hard-coded locally, and once it's dragged onto this form, it's just done. It has no further binding back to the original base class. I even thought, maybe that I could go in and go back to this original one and save. I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go into the designer, and I'll just sort of strip out all these hard-coded, references to settings and stuff like that, so I come in here. These are just properties. The object is still there. The object is still defined up here, and the object is created right here. And all I did was sort of delete out all the manual settings of the individual child controls. Okay, I thought, oh, I'll do that, right? So then I saved it. Close everything down and save it. Let me just sort of, now I thought, okay, I'll open it up again. Well, now look what it does. When I opened up the form, look, all this stuff up here has just gone back to some stupid default values. If you look at the view code now, this thing, it's just totally ignoring it. And what will happen is if I come here and, like, I think if I move this thing a little bit and hit save, it'll actually cause the designer to regenerate the code in each individual control. But look what it's done. It has put a blank caption and locations, or basically just a bunch of deadgum default values for all of the individual controls inside of the thing. Okay, but this is just simply not going to work as a way that the Visual Studio natively handles, controls and controls dropped onto a form, to where that once you drop it on here, you lose all of the affiliation that this stupid thing has back to the base control. In FoxPro, any changes I made in that user control, they would be brought forward here, unless I would explicitly go in and try to change some of the individual settings of them. I would expect that you can do that in FoxPro. You can override those local settings, but only if you override them locally do they supersede any changes in the base class. Otherwise, any changes you make down in that base class, they have to propagate up in this form and every other form that uses it. So it's going to be a real battle, I think, fighting Visual Studio, and is the way that dragging those controls onto a form adds this hard-coded stuff in here and it never goes and reevaluates this stuff at the base control level again. Okay, so hopefully that explains the problem to you a little bit, and you can sort of experiment with what that would mean to support this type of inheritance that we're going to need.